Hey guys, I wanted to make a quick video about decimal computation. In the video, I'm going to show you how to add, subtract, and multiply decimals. Let's go ahead and get started. Adding decimal numbers is pretty easy. It's just like adding whole numbers. The first thing I'm going to do is rewrite my problem vertically, and I have to make sure that I align my decimal points up. If I don't line my decimal points up, then my answer will not be correct. So I'm going to write 24 and 5/10 on top, plus 17 and 32 hundredths on the bottom. Now notice when I wrote my problem vertically, my decimal points are in a line. Now I also want you to notice that in 24 and 5/10, I don't have a digit in my hundredths place for me to add to the 2 in the hundredths place. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 0 here as a placeholder so that both numbers have the same amount of digits behind the decimal point. Okay, before I add, the first thing that I have to do is drop my decimal point down into my answer. Okay, so my decimal point is going to go straight down into the answer. So it's going to go right here. Now I'm going to add my numbers like I normally would from right to left. Okay, 0 plus 2 is 2. 5 plus 3 is 8. 4 plus 7 is 11. Put my 1 down and carry my 1. 1 and 2 make 3, plus 1 more makes 4. So my answer is 41 and 82 hundredths. Now I'm going to practice turning my decimal into a fraction. Okay. Anything that is in front of the decimal point is a whole. So here I have 41 wholes. So I'm going to put a big 41 here. And I notice that my answer ends in the hundredths place. So the denominator of my decimal is going to be 100. And I'm just going to put this number after the decimal point as my numerator. So 82 is my numerator. So I have 41 and 82 hundredths. Here I have a problem where I am subtracting two decimal numbers, and it's just like adding decimal numbers. The first thing I want to do is rewrite my problem vertically, making sure I line up my decimal points. So 62 and 13 hundredths goes on top, and I am subtracting 21 and 6/10. Notice I made sure my decimals were all in a line. Now, in 21 and 6/10, I do not have a digit in the hundredths place for me to subtract from the 3. So, again, I need to put a placeholder, which would be a 0, in that spot so that both numbers have the same number of decimal places. Before I subtract, I need to bring my decimal point straight down and put it in my answer. So I'm going to bring my decimal point and put it right there. And now I'm just going to subtract like I normally would. 3 minus 0 is 3. I cannot subtract 6 from 1, so I'm going to go next door and borrow from the 2. That 2 becomes a 1, and this 1 becomes 11. 11 minus 6 is 5. 1 minus 1 is 0. 6 minus 2 is 4. So here my answer is 40 and 53 hundredths. And again, I'm just going to practice turning my decimal into a fraction. So anything that comes in front of the decimal point is my whole. So I have 40 wholes. So I'm going to write a big 40. And since my decimal ends in the hundredths place, the denominator of my fraction is going to be 100, and my numerator is just going to be what comes after the decimal point, which is 53. So I'm going to put 53 here, and I have 40 and 53 hundredths. I wanted to show you an example of a subtraction problem where one number is a whole number and it doesn't have any decimal places, and the other number does. Okay, so I'm going to do what I normally would do and line my problem up vertically, but I want you to notice that 11 doesn't have any decimal places. So what I have to do is I actually have to make it into a decimal number, and it's really easy. So I'm going to take 11, and then right after the 11, I'm going to put a decimal point, and I'm going to put 2 zeros as placeholders because 3 and 78 hundredths has 2 decimal places behind the decimal point, and I want 11 to also have 2 decimal places. And then I am going to write 3 and 78 hundredths right below it, making sure I line my decimal points up. Now, before I subtract, I'm going to go ahead and bring my decimal point straight down and put it in my answer. Now I can just subtract like I normally would. Well, I can't take 8 away from 0, so I'm going to go next door and borrow, but there's actually nothing to borrow from. So I'm actually going to, instead of borrowing from the 1, I'm going to make this a 10, and I'm going to take 1 away from the 10, and that becomes 9, and this 0 becomes a 10. So now I can subtract. 10 minus 8 is 2. 9 minus 7 is 2. I cannot take 3 away from 0, so I have to go next door and borrow. That 1 becomes a 0. This 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. So whenever you are subtracting a decimal from a whole number like I have here, you just have to turn your whole number into a decimal. Multiplying decimal numbers is a little different than adding and subtracting decimal numbers because you don't have to worry about lining up any decimal points. So here I have 4 and 27 hundredths, and I'm just multiplying it by 5. The first thing I'm going to do is rewrite my problem vertically. And I'm not going to worry about lining up decimal points. I'm not going to turn my 5 into a decimal. I'm actually going to just pretend like I don't even have a decimal point in one of the numbers, and I'm just going to line up my numbers vertically like I normally would. So I have 4 and 27 hundredths, and I'm just going to multiply it by 5. Okay? So I'm going to pretend like I don't even see that decimal point. And it's almost like I'm multiplying 427 by 5. I'm going to worry about the decimal point at the very end. So I'm going to multiply 5 by all 3 digits on top. 5 times 7 is 35. So I'm going to put my 5 down, carry my 3. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 3 more is 13. Put my 3 down, carry my 1. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 more is 21. So it looks like I have 2,135, but that would be the answer if I was multiplying 427 by 5. But remember, I'm actually multiplying 4 27/100ths by 5. So now we have to deal with the decimal point. And what we're going to do is we are going to count the number of decimal places in both of the factors. And that's going to determine where we put the decimal point in the product. So let's look at 4 27/100ths. Behind the decimal point, there are actually 2 decimal places. So off to the side here, I'm going to write 2 decimal places. Okay. Now, in the number 5, this is just a whole number, so there aren't any decimal places. So I'm just going to put 0 decimal places. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add the amount of decimal places in both of the factors. So 2 plus 0 just gives me 2 decimal places total. And that's how I know how many decimal places go in my product. So I need to put 2 decimal places in my product. To do that, I'm going to start at the very end of my answer, right here. Okay? And I'm actually going to make 2 hops backwards. So 1, 2. And that's where the decimal point goes. So notice I now have 2 decimal places in my answer. So when I multiply 4 27/100ths by 5, I get 21 35/100ths. I just wanted to show you one more example of multiplying decimals. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite my problem vertically, pretending like the decimal points don't even exist. I'm just going to ignore them, and I'm just going to write my problem up and down and not worry about lining up my decimal points. So I have 2 61/100ths times 4/10ths. So I'm going to multiply these numbers pretending like I don't even see the decimal points. I'm just going to multiply them like I normally would multiply any numbers. So 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 6 is 24. I put my 4 down, carry my 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 more is 10. Now, it looks like I have an answer of 1,044, but remember, I'm multiplying decimals, so I have to figure out where to put the decimal point in my answer. So I'm going to look back at both of the factors in the multiplication problem. In 2 61/100ths, there are 2 places behind the decimal point. So I'm going to put 2 decimal places. And in 4/10ths, there is 1 place behind the decimal point. So I'm going to put 1 decimal place. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the number of decimal places in both of the factors, because that's how many decimal places need to be in my answer. So 2 plus 1 gives me 3 total decimal places. So I need to have 3 decimal places in my answer. So I'm going to start at the end of my answer and make 3 hops backwards and put in my decimal point. I'm going to start here and make 1, 2, 3 hops and put in my decimal point. So when I multiply 2 and 61/100ths by 4/10ths, I get 1 and 44 thousandths.